Anxiety is not your enemy. It is the signal that you are fighting life instead of letting it carry you. The tight chest, the racing thoughts, the constant anticipation of what might go wrong are not flaws in you. They are symptoms of strain, and strain is always born from resistance. You have been taught to manage anxiety, analyze it, wrestle it into submission, but struggle feeds what it fights. The more you try to control fear, the more attention you give it, and attention is nourishment. What you feed grows, what you release dissolves. Think of the moment anxiety takes hold. Nothing has happened yet, but your body is already bracing. You rehearse outcomes, prepare for disappointment, and call it being responsible. Yet responsibility does not require suffering. Suffering begins when you assume the burden was yours to carry. Anxious minds try to solve tomorrow today. They argue with the future, negotiating outcomes that have not arrived. But life does not respond to argument, it responds to state. And a state of strain can only attract more strain, no matter how noble your intentions. There is a way anxiety breaks not through force, but through surrender. The moment you stop gripping the situation, the nervous system softens, not because the problem is gone, but because authority has returned to the right place. You were never meant to manage the universe. Notice how anxiety always says, "What if?" That question seems innocent, yet it is a prophecy spoken in fear. Every "what if" assumes danger, loss, or failure. And the mind, obedient servant that it is, prepares the body to live inside that imagined future. The body believes what the mind repeats. Muscles tighten, breath shortens, sleep becomes shallow, all because of stories told in advance. Anxiety is simply imagination, misused creative power, pointed toward fear instead of peace. Most people think peace comes after everything works out, but peace is not the reward, it is the requirement. Until the inner storm settles, the outer cannot reorder. Calm is not passivity, it is alignment with a higher intelligence already at work. Picture yourself lying awake at night, heart racing, replaying conversations, decisions, mistakes. You promise yourself, "I'll relax once this is resolved." Yet resolution waits for relaxation. This reversal is what anxiety hides from you. There is a profound relief in admitting, "This is not mine to fix." Not resignation, but trust. When you release personal strain, you do not abandon responsibility. You hand it to a power that knows the way, and that handoff changes everything. Anxiety thrives on control. It whispers, "If you don't worry, something will go wrong." But worry has never prevented disaster. It has only rehearsed it. The universe does not need your tension to function. It needs your cooperation. The best way to break anxiety is to stop feeding it with effort. Effort says, "I am alone in this." Release says, "I am supported." One posture collapses you inward. The other opens space for solutions you could never plan. You may fear that letting go means losing care, discipline, or ambition, but release does not make you careless. It makes you clear. When the mind rests, intuition speaks, and guidance replaces panic with simple, exact direction. There is always a moment when anxiety peaks, when the urge to control is strongest. That is the moment to pause, not to think, but to drop, to breathe, to say inwardly, "I place this where it belongs." That single act interrupts the cycle. Anxiety cannot survive without your participation. It needs your attention, your belief, your rehearsal. Withdraw those, and it weakens, not instantly, but inevitably, like a fire deprived of oxygen. What you are releasing is not concern, but false responsibility. You were never appointed manager of outcomes. You were meant to listen, respond, and trust the unfolding. When you return to that role, the mind regains its natural calm. Many fear that without anxiety, they will fail. Yet anxiety has never been the source of success. Clarity has. Peace sharpens perception. Calm restores timing. And right action arises naturally from a settled mind. When you stop struggling, the body learns safety again. Breath deepens. Thoughts slow. Sleep returns. And from that state, answers appear, not forced, not dramatic, but quietly effective. This is why release feels uncomfortable at first. The anxious mind has mistaken tension for protection. Letting go feels like exposure. But on the other side of that fear is relief you forgot was possible. Do not try to eliminate anxiety. That is another form of struggle. Simply stop arguing with life. Stop rehearsing harm. Stop carrying what was never assigned to you. Peace is not something you earn after things improve. It is the doorway through which improvement enters. Release the struggle and notice how what held you tight begins to fall away on its own. When a man is troubled by anxiety, he is inclined to believe that something is wrong with him. He speaks of weakness, nerves, or lack of control, not knowing that anxiety is not a defect of character but a signal of misdirected authority. It is the mind announcing that it has assumed a burden never meant for it. Nature has given man the power to think, not the responsibility to govern all outcomes. When this distinction is ignored, strain appears, and strain is the parent of anxiety. I have studied the mental habits of successful men for more than a generation, and I have found that those who are free from chronic anxiety are not those who escape difficulty, but those who understand their proper role in the order of cause and effect. They concern themselves with direction, not with every possible result. They govern thought, purpose, and effort, and they leave the management of outcomes to law. This simple division of responsibility, once understood, dissolves a large portion of what men call worry. Anxiety arises when a man attempts to live in the future while standing in the present. He rehearses events that have not occurred, argues with conditions that do not yet exist, and imagines consequences before causes have been properly set in motion. This habit appears prudent, yet it is profoundly wasteful. The mind was not designed to negotiate endlessly with uncertainty. It was designed to select a course and move upon it with faith. The anxious man believes he is being responsible. He says, "If I do not worry, something will be overlooked." This belief is one of the most costly errors of human thought. Worry has never prevented misfortune. It has only drained strength from the present moment, where all effective action must take place. Responsibility belongs to thought disciplined by purpose, not to emotional tension masquerading as care. I have observed that anxiety increases in direct proportion to the number of things a man believes he must control. When he assumes authority over circumstances, over other people's decisions, over the timing of events, his mind becomes overcrowded. Order disappears. Confusion enters. The body, obedient servant that it is, responds with tension, rapid breath, restless sleep, and fatigue. These are not punishments. They are signals that the mind has exceeded its jurisdiction. One of the most accomplished men I ever studied told me that he learned early in life to withdraw emotion from uncertainty. He did not deny risk, but he refused to carry it emotionally. When questioned about this habit, he replied that worry consumed the very energy required for clear judgment. He chose instead to think calmly, act deliberately, and trust the sequence of cause and effect. Others called him fortunate. He knew he was orderly. This is an important distinction. Fortune is often nothing more than freedom from inner strain. When a man ceases to exhaust himself mentally, his powers organize naturally, perception sharpens, judgment steadies, timing improves. Anxiety, which thrives on scattered attention, weakens when thought becomes unified. Most anxiety can be traced to one fundamental error: confusing effort with strain. Effort is constructive. Strain is destructive. Effort applies energy toward a chosen end. Strain attempts to force certainty where none is yet required. The successful man applies effort where effort belongs and releases strain where strain has no function. When a man understands that he is responsible for planting seed, not for commanding harvest, anxiety loses its authority. He still plans, he still works, he still prepares, but he no longer braces himself against imagined futures. He no longer lives mentally in disasters that may never arrive. Others observe this difference immediately. The anxious man speaks rapidly, explains excessively, and seeks reassurance. The calm man speaks with measure, listens more than he talks, and does not hurry to justify himself. Confidence is not loud. It is quiet, and people instinctively trust it. Anxiety is not courage in disguise. It is imagination without discipline. The same faculty that enables a man to envision success will, if left unguided, rehearse failure with equal vividness. The difference lies not in imagination itself, but in leadership over it. I have known men whose lives were dominated by anxiety until they learned to govern the images they entertained. They ceased picturing defeat and began picturing orderly progress. At first, this required deliberate practice. In time, it became habit. As the habit changed, the anxiety diminished, and opportunity began to appear with less resistance. This change did not come through force. It came through understanding. The man learned that he was feeding anxiety by granting it attention. He withdrew that attention and redirected it toward constructive expectation. In doing so, he reclaimed authority over his own mind. Anxiety thrives on the question, what if? That question is never neutral. It always assumes danger. When repeated, it trains the subconscious mind to expect harm. The disciplined thinker replaces that question with a better one. What is the next orderly step? That question directs thought back to the present, where power resides. I often advise men who suffer from chronic anxiety to repeat quietly, until the meaning becomes clear. I am responsible for my thoughts, not for all results. This statement restores proper balance. Another useful declaration is, I act with intelligence and release the rest. These are not words of escape. They are words of alignment. As this alignment takes place, the body responds, breath deepens, muscles relax, sleep improves. These changes are not accidental. They reflect the restoration of order in thought. Anxiety is not broken by attack. It is broken by correction. When authority returns to its proper place, anxiety finds no foothold. It cannot survive where thought is disciplined and responsibility is rightly divided. The man who understands this principle does not seek to eliminate anxiety through struggle. He removes its cause. He ceases to carry what was never assigned to him. In doing so, he saves untold energy, clarity, and time. This is the first and most important step in breaking anxiety, restoring authority to thought and releasing strain from outcome. When this step is taken, the mind begins to settle of its own accord, and the way opens for the deeper disciplines that follow. For anxiety is not a life sentence. It is a signal, and when the signal is understood, it no longer needs to repeat itself. When anxiety has been correctly identified as misdirected authority, the next truth reveals itself with clarity. Anxiety is not born of danger, but of imagination left without leadership. Man possesses no faculty more powerful than imagination. It is the workshop in which every achievement is first constructed. Yet, when imagination is not governed by purpose and reason, it becomes the very instrument through which fear manufactures suffering. The anxious mind is not idle. On the contrary, it is intensely active. It constructs scenes, predicts outcomes, and rehearses events with remarkable detail. The same faculty that could be used to foresee success is employed instead to anticipate defeat. Thus, anxiety is not weakness. It is creative power misapplied. I have observed that men who suffer most from anxiety are often those with strong imaginations. Their minds move quickly, leap ahead of facts, and fill gaps with assumption. When guided, such minds produce great achievement. When unguided, they become factories of distress. The difference lies entirely in discipline. Fearful imagination operates without evidence. It accepts possibility as certainty and treats uncertainty as threat. The anxious man says, "Something may go wrong," and the imagination immediately supplies a picture of disaster. The body, unable to distinguish between imagined and actual experience, responds as though the danger were present. Thus, tension arises without cause, and strength is wasted before action is required. This process is repeated so often that it becomes habit. The anxious man believes his fear is instinctive, when in truth it is rehearsed. He has trained his imagination to expect disorder, and expectation shapes experience. I have known men who lived for years under this strain, exhausting themselves mentally long before any difficulty arrived. They prepared endlessly for failure, believing this preparation would protect them. It did not. It merely deprived them of clarity when real decisions were required. Contrast this with men of achievement who trained their imagination differently. They did not deny obstacles, but they refused to dwell upon them. They directed imagination toward orderly outcomes, constructive solutions, and successful conclusions. This habit conserved energy. When difficulty arose, they met it fresh, not depleted. One successful leader told me that he made it a rule never to picture defeat before it occurred. He said that defeat, if it came, would require all his strength, and he refused to spend that strength in advance. Others called this optimism. He called it economy. Economy of mental energy is one of the least understood principles of success. Anxiety wastes energy by expending it on shadows. Imagination, when properly governed, conserves energy by preparing the mind for effective action rather than emotional rehearsal. The anxious man believes he is preparing. In truth, he is practicing failure. The subconscious mind, which does not reason, accepts these rehearsals as instruction. It then organizes perception and behavior around them. Opportunity is overlooked. Timing is missed. Judgment is clouded. This is why anxiety often produces the very outcomes it fears, not by fate, but by influence. The mind expecting disorder moves differently than the mind expecting order. One hesitates, rushes, and reacts. The other observes, times, and decides. Imagination, therefore, must be reclaimed. It must be brought under the authority of deliberate thought. This does not mean suppressing imagination, but redirecting it. Suppression increases tension. Direction restores harmony. I advise men at this stage to become conscious observers of their own mental pictures, not to judge them harshly, but to notice them. When an image of failure arises, it should not be indulged. It should be replaced. Replacement, not resistance, is the law of mental change. A useful practice is to deliberately form pictures of orderly progress. not extravagant fantasies, but calm, reasonable images of success unfolding step by step. These images, repeated, impress the subconscious mind with expectancy instead of alarm. One man whom I studied suffered greatly from anxiety over his business affairs. He imagined collapse at every turn. When he learned to replace these images with pictures of steady growth and cooperation, his anxiety diminished noticeably. Within a year, his affairs stabilized. He believed the change was external. In truth, it began within. Others noticed the change in him before results appeared. He spoke more slowly. He listened more carefully. He ceased reacting impulsively. Associates began to trust his judgment again. Confidence attracts confidence. Anxiety thrives on constant rehearsal. Remove the rehearsal, and anxiety weakens. This is why repetition of constructive thought is essential. The subconscious mind learns through repetition. One calm thought cannot undo years of fearful habit, but persistent redirection produces lasting change. I often suggest affirmations that reassert leadership over imagination, such as, I direct my imagination toward constructive ends. Another effective statement is, I expect order, and I prepare for success. These declarations, when repeated daily, retrain the mind. It is important to understand that calm expectation is not denial of reality. It is selection of focus. Reality contains many possibilities. The disciplined mind chooses which to entertain. This choice determines emotional state. The anxious man entertains every possibility. The disciplined man entertains only those that serve his purpose. This is not blindness, it is command. As imagination comes under control, anxiety loses its fuel. The body responds accordingly. Restlessness diminishes. Concentration improves. Sleep deepens. These changes are not mysterious. They reflect the restoration of mental order. Others respond to this order instinctively. They sense reliability. They feel steadied in the presence of one whose mind is not scattered. Opportunities that require trust begin to appear. Anxiety cannot coexist with disciplined imagination. One requires chaos, the other produces order. The transition from one to the other is not sudden, but it is certain when practiced consistently. This is why repetition remains essential. New habits are formed by repetition, not by understanding alone. Understanding shows the way. Repetition builds the road. The man who persists in directing his imagination saves years of inner conflict. He no longer exhausts himself in advance. He meets life as it comes, with strength intact. This is the second great step in breaking anxiety, reclaiming imagination and placing it under deliberate leadership. When this is accomplished, the mind ceases to create its own distress, and life begins to unfold with less friction and greater clarity. For imagination, once mastered, becomes the ally of peace rather than the architect of fear. When imagination has been reclaimed and brought under leadership, a man discovers that anxiety does not disappear merely because fearful pictures have ceased. There remains a deeper cause, more subtle and more persistent, which must be addressed if calm is to become permanent. This cause is mental resistance. Anxiety, at its root, is the strain produced when the mind argues with life instead of cooperating with it. Most men exhaust themselves not through effort, but through opposition. They oppose delay. They oppose uncertainty. They oppose conditions as they are, while wishing them to be otherwise. This inner conflict produces friction, and friction produces strain. The body responds to this strain as it would to physical pressure, tightening, guarding, and preparing for struggle. Thus, anxiety arises even when no immediate danger exists. Life moves according to law. It unfolds in sequence, not according to personal urgency. When a man insists that events occur faster, differently, or more predictably than law allows, he places himself in opposition to the very forces he depends upon. Anxiety is the sensation of this opposition. I have observed that men who live with constant anxiety are often men of strong will. They are accustomed to directing effort, commanding action, and forcing progress. These qualities serve them well in certain fields, yet when applied inwardly to life itself, they become destructive. Life does not respond to force, it responds to alignment. The calm man is not passive, he is cooperative. He understands that his role is to select direction and apply effort where effort belongs, then release the remainder. The anxious man attempts to supervise the entire process, from cause to conclusion. In doing so, he burdens his mind with responsibilities it cannot fulfill. I once studied a man who was known for decisive action and relentless drive, yet he suffered greatly from inner strain. He admitted that he felt responsible for anticipating every possible obstacle. His mind never rested. When he learned to distinguish between action and interference, his anxiety diminished. He still acted decisively, but he no longer fought unseen futures. His strength increased as his strain decreased. This distinction between action and resistance is critical. Action moves with purpose. Resistance pushes against reality. One advances life, the other exhausts the mind. Many men believe that if they relax inwardly, they will lose control. This belief is one of the chief supporters of anxiety. Control, properly understood, is not tension. It is clarity. A man does not steer a ship by gripping the wheel in panic. He steers by understanding direction and responding calmly to conditions. Mental yielding is not surrender of purpose. It is surrender of strain. When a man yields mentally, he ceases arguing with what is. He accepts the present condition as a starting point, not as a verdict. From that acceptance, intelligent action becomes possible. Anxiety cannot survive acceptance. It requires resistance. The moment a man says inwardly, "This is where I stand, and I will move forward from here," tension loosens, breath deepens, thought clears, authority returns. I have seen men who were tormented by anxiety learn to practice this yielding deliberately. When faced with uncertainty, they ceased demanding immediate answers. They allowed time to perform its function. This practice alone transformed their inner state. Others noticed the change before the men themselves did. They were described as steadier, more reliable, less reactive. People trusted them with greater responsibility because they no longer transmitted nervous urgency. Calm is contagious, just as anxiety is. Mental resistance often hides beneath the language of effort. A man says, "I am trying," when in truth he is struggling. Struggle implies opposition. Effort implies direction. When effort is applied without resistance, energy flows. When resistance is present, energy is consumed. This is why anxiety often increases when a man tries harder. He adds effort without removing opposition. The correct approach is not to increase force, but to reduce friction. Friction is reduced when the mind ceases to demand certainty before action. Life reveals itself step by step. The anxious man insists upon seeing the entire path before moving. The disciplined man takes the next clear step and trusts the remainder to unfold. I have studied many men of achievement who spoke openly of this principle. They planned carefully, yet they did not demand guarantees. They acted on probability informed by judgment, not on fear demanding certainty. This distinction preserved their mental strength. Anxiety also thrives on the belief that one must always be prepared for the worst. This belief appears sensible, yet it is deeply flawed. Preparation belongs to action. Expectation belongs to thought. When expectation is poisoned by fear, preparation becomes frantic. When expectation is calm, preparation becomes effective. I advise men troubled by anxiety to examine where they are resisting life. Are they resisting time? Are they resisting change? Are they resisting uncertainty? Each point of resistance is a source of strain. A simple practice is to replace inner argument with inner agreement. Agreement does not mean approval, it means acknowledgement. One may say inwardly, "This is the condition. I will respond intelligently." This statement alone reduces tension. Affirmations are useful here, not as charms, but as reminders of posture. Statements such as, "I move with life, not against it," or "I act where action is required and release the rest," restore balance when repeated consistently. As resistance diminishes, intuition becomes more accessible. The anxious mind cannot hear guidance because it is too busy arguing. The cooperative mind listens. In listening, it receives direction that effort alone could never discover. This is why men often report sudden clarity after surrendering strain. They did not gain new information, they removed interference. Guidance was always present. Anxiety drowned it out. Others perceive this shift as wisdom. They may say the man has matured or become seasoned. In truth, he has ceased wasting energy in opposition. His judgment appears sound because it is no longer clouded by urgency. Anxiety weakens when the mind accepts its proper role. It disappears when resistance ends. This does not happen in a single moment, but through repeated practice. Each time a man chooses cooperation over struggle, anxiety loosens its hold. This is the third great step in breaking anxiety, abandoning mental resistance and adopting a posture of cooperation with life. When this step is taken, strain dissolves, and effort regains its rightful place as a tool rather than a burden. For life does not need to be fought to be lived well. It needs to be understood and met with intelligent cooperation. When a man has learned to withdraw authority from fear, to govern imagination, and to cease resisting life inwardly, there remains yet another adjustment that completes the breaking of anxiety. This adjustment is subtle, yet decisive. It is the understanding that peace must precede correct action, not follow it. Most men invert this order and pay dearly for the mistake. The anxious man believes he will be calm once matters are settled. He says, "When this is resolved, I will rest." Yet resolution waits upon rest. Calm is not the reward for success. It is the condition through which success operates. Until the mind settles, judgment remains impaired, timing is distorted, and effort loses precision. I have observed that men who live free from anxiety do not wait for certainty before regaining calm. They regain calm first, and certainty follows. This is not superstition. It is the law of mental cause and effect. Thought organized in calm produces organized results. Thought scattered by fear produces confusion. Anxiety thrives in anticipation. It projects the mind forward into imagined futures and demands answers before causes have matured. The calm mind remains in the present, where power resides. It deals with what is before it and allows the remainder to unfold in sequence. This distinction alone accounts for much of the difference between men who succeed steadily and men who exhaust themselves in effort. One lives mentally ahead of events, constantly bracing. The other lives where action is possible and conserves strength. I once studied a man whose responsibilities were immense and whose decisions affected thousands. Yet, he was remarkably free from anxiety. When asked how he maintained composure, he replied that agitation never improved judgment. and therefore had no place in his thinking. He did not deny the seriousness of his duties. He simply refused to approach them in a state that would impair his effectiveness. This refusal is an act of discipline, not temperament. Calm is not inherited. It is cultivated. It is the result of repeated decisions to return the mind to order before proceeding. Most men do the opposite. They attempt to think their way out of anxiety while remaining anxious. This is like trying to straighten a crooked line with a shaking hand. Thought cannot be corrected from a disturbed state. The state must be corrected first. The moment a man deliberately restores calm, by pausing, by quieting inner argument, by releasing strain, his thinking improves automatically. Solutions that were invisible under pressure become obvious. Timing reasserts itself. Action regains direction. This is why anxiety often dissolves suddenly, not gradually. The cause was never the situation, but the state. Change the state, and the mind reorganizes itself with remarkable speed. Others observe this change as competence. They see a man who does not rush, who does not over-explain, who does not react emotionally. They feel steadied by his presence. They trust his judgment because it is not distorted by urgency. Calm does not mean inaction. On the contrary, calm produces the most effective action. When the mind is settled, effort is applied where it belongs and withheld where it would be wasted. This economy of action distinguishes leaders from strugglers. Anxiety scatters effort. Calm concentrates it. The anxious man does many things poorly. The calm man does fewer things well. Time responds accordingly. One feels pursued by time. The other feels supported by it. There is a common fear that without anxiety, ambition will fade. This fear is unfounded. Anxiety has never been the source of progress. Purpose has. The calm mind does not lose ambition. It refines it. It replaces frantic striving with deliberate advancement. I have known men who believed their anxiety kept them sharp. When they learned to operate from calm, they discovered that clarity sharpened them far more. Decisions became cleaner, errors decreased, fatigue diminished. The body, too, responds to this shift. Breath deepens, sleep improves, appetite normalizes. These changes are not incidental. They reflect the restoration of harmony between thought and action. It is important to recognize that calm must be practiced repeatedly. The habit of anxiety does not dissolve through a single insight. It dissolves through consistent return to order. Each time a man notices strain and deliberately releases it, he weakens the old habit and strengthens the new. Useful reminders at this stage are simple and direct. Statements such as, "I return my mind to order," or "I act best when calm," serve to reestablish posture when old patterns attempt to reassert themselves. The man who practices this discipline finds that anxiety loses its power to surprise him. When it appears, he recognizes it as a signal, not a command. He responds by restoring calm rather than escalating effort. This response alone prevents anxiety from gaining momentum. Others may marvel at his composure under pressure. They may attribute it to confidence or experience. In truth, it is alignment. He has learned the proper sequence of inner life. Calm first, action second. This sequence, once mastered, applies to all areas of life. In business, it produces sound judgment. In relationships, it prevents needless conflict. In personal affairs, it conserves energy. Anxiety fades because it has lost its function. The man who understands this principle no longer postpones peace. He claims it as a working condition. From that condition, he thinks clearly, chooses wisely, and acts effectively. This is the fourth great step in breaking anxiety, restoring calm as the foundation of all action. When this foundation is laid, anxiety cannot rebuild itself, for it depends upon disorder to survive. Peace, once established as a habit, becomes the silent ally of success. When calm has been restored as the proper foundation of action, anxiety loses much of its visible power. Yet for many men, traces of it linger in subtle form. It no longer appears as panic, but as quiet uneasiness, constant vigilance, or the feeling that one must always be on guard. This final remnant dissolves only when a man establishes a new inner habit reliance upon law rather than upon tension. Most anxiety survives because a man secretly believes that if he relaxes his watchfulness, disorder will follow. He has mistaken tension for protection. This belief is rarely examined, yet it governs behavior relentlessly. The mind remains alert, braced, and prepared for disturbance. Such a posture consumes strength without purpose. I have found that men who finally free themselves from anxiety do so not by becoming careless, but by becoming exact. They learn where vigilance belongs and where it does not. They watch their thoughts closely, but they do not watch the future. They supervise effort, but they do not supervise outcomes. This distinction, once mastered, ends the last hold anxiety has upon the mind. The man who trusts law understands that causes produce effects with certainty. He does not fear the future because he governs the present. He knows that disciplined thinking, purposeful action, and persistent effort must yield results in due time. This knowledge replaces nervous watchfulness with quiet expectancy. Many men exhaust themselves by continually checking whether results are forming. They look for signs, compare progress, and measure themselves against others. This habit feeds anxiety subtly. The man who relies upon law does not peer anxiously at growth. He knows that seed planted in proper soil will sprout without supervision. One successful builder whom I studied said that the moment he stopped watching his affairs nervously, they began to stabilize. He did not abandon oversight. He abandoned strain. He attended to what required action and released what required time. In doing so, he regained mental freedom and improved results simultaneously. Anxiety often disguises itself as caution. The anxious man says he is being careful, when in truth, he is being mistrustful of law. He believes that without his constant concern, things will collapse. Yet history proves otherwise. The greatest achievements were built by men who trusted order more than fear. When reliance shifts from tension to law, the body responds as well. Muscles release habitual tightness. Breathing becomes natural. Fatigue diminishes. These changes are not accidental. They reflect the mind's withdrawal from unnecessary supervision. Others perceive this shift as confidence. They feel secure around a man who does not transmit nervous expectancy. They sense that he is anchored. They trust his leadership because it does not fluctuate with circumstance. This reliance must be practiced until it becomes habitual. Old habits of anxious vigilance may attempt to return, especially during periods of uncertainty. When they do, they must be met with understanding, not alarm. The man simply returns attention to his thoughts, his actions, and his purpose. I advise men at this stage to adopt affirmations that confirm reliance rather than effort. Statements such as, "Law is working in my favor," or "I plant causes and trust effects," reinforce the proper mental posture. Repetition is essential, for habits are replaced gradually, not suddenly. The mind no longer believes tension is required for safety. It understands that order does not depend upon emotional strain. This understanding produces a profound sense of inner security, not the security of certainty about events, but the security of confidence in process. The man knows that whatever arises can be met intelligently because his thinking is disciplined and his posture is calm. At this point, anxiety no longer defines experience. It may appear briefly, but it does not dominate. The man remains steady. Others may still struggle under pressure, yet they notice that he does not. They may ask how he manages. He may not be able to explain it easily, for it is now a habit rather than a technique. He simply lives from order. This is the final step in breaking anxiety, replacing tension with trust in law. When this step is complete, anxiety has no foundation upon which to rebuild itself. The man who reaches this point does not merely manage anxiety. He outgrows it. He no longer requires it as a signal, for he lives within alignment. His mind is governed. His imagination is disciplined. His effort is precise. His reliance is sound. From this state, life unfolds with greater ease, not because difficulty vanishes, but because strain does. And when strain disappears, anxiety loses its reason for existence. This is the natural outcome of right thinking practiced consistently. It is not sudden, but it is permanent, and it marks the completion of the inner work that restores peace as a working condition of life. When instruction has been given and the mind has followed it carefully, there comes a moment when effort must give way to embodiment. Knowledge, if left as something merely understood, soon fades into memory, but knowledge practiced quietly becomes character, and character governs destiny without conscious strain. At this point, the work before you is no longer learning, but living. If anxiety has ruled you in the past, it was not because you lacked courage, intelligence, or ambition. It was because you were attempting to govern life from the wrong level. You carried responsibility beyond its proper boundary. You supervised what required trust. You strained where alignment was sufficient. This misunderstanding is common, and it is costly, but it is not permanent. The correction of this misunderstanding does not require force. It requires consistency. Anxiety was not formed in a day, and it will not dissolve in a day. It was formed through repeated patterns of thought, expectation, and reaction. It is undone in the same manner, by repetition, in the opposite direction. You must understand that the subconscious mind does not reason. It accepts instruction through habit. What you repeatedly expect, it prepares you to meet. What you repeatedly fear, it trains the body to endure and advance. Therefore, the work ahead is not heroic struggle, but quiet discipline. Many men believe discipline to be severe. In truth, discipline is mercy. It saves energy. It prevents waste. It replaces chaos with order. The disciplined mind rests more easily because it is no longer pulled in conflicting directions. As you move forward, you may notice moments when anxiety attempts to return. It may arise without apparent cause. This does not mean failure. It means habit is releasing its hold. Old reflexes surface briefly before disappearing. When this occurs, do not resist. Resistance feeds what it opposes. Instead, return calmly to what you now know. Bring attention back to your thoughts. Ask whether you are attempting to control outcome instead of direction. Ask whether imagination has been left unguided. Ask whether you are arguing with life instead of cooperating with it. These questions, asked honestly, restore alignment immediately. It is important that you do not attempt to eliminate anxiety by watching for it. Attention is nourishment. Observe it only long enough to correct posture, then withdraw attention and proceed with calm action. The less interest you grant anxiety, the faster it weakens. You will find that peace grows quietly. It does not announce itself. It appears first as slightly deeper breath, slightly clearer thought, slightly improved sleep. These small signs are evidence that the mind is relinquishing unnecessary supervision. Others will notice the change before you do. They may comment that you seem steadier, less hurried, more assured. They may trust your judgment more readily. They may seek your counsel in moments of uncertainty. This response is natural. People feel safe in the presence of order. You may be tempted to explain this change. Resist the impulse. Truth does not require defense. Let conduct speak. Let calm demonstrate itself through action rather than words. Remember always that anxiety is not broken by avoidance of responsibility, but by correct assumption of it. You are responsible for governing your thoughts, directing your imagination, selecting your actions, and persisting toward purpose. You are not responsible for managing all results, predicting all futures, or preventing all difficulty. This distinction, once lived, frees the mind permanently. The man who understands it no longer carries tomorrow into today. He prepares intelligently, then rests. He acts decisively, then releases. He trusts sequence instead of demanding certainty. You will also find that repetition remains essential. Even correct thought must be reinforced until it becomes automatic. A single affirmation repeated once has little effect. The same affirmation repeated daily reshapes belief. Use repetition not as a remedy for fear, but as a builder of habit. Simple statements serve best. Not elaborate declarations, but clear reminders of posture. Say often, inwardly and without emotion, I govern thought and trust law, or I act with clarity and release strain. Such statements realign the mind gently and effectively. There will come a point when anxiety no longer occupies your attention. It may still exist as a distant memory, but it no longer defines your experience. At that point, you will realize that anxiety was never your enemy. It was your instructor. It pointed out where alignment was lacking. This realization brings a new respect for difficulty. You no longer curse it. You study it. You no longer flee it. You learn from it. Each challenge becomes a refinement rather than a threat. The man who reaches this stage does not claim perfection. He claims order. He still encounters uncertainty, but he does not surrender to it. He still experiences pressure, but he does not internalize it. He remains centered. Such a man is not easily shaken by circumstance. He has discovered that stability does not come from fixed conditions, but from disciplined thought. Conditions change. Thought governs response. Response shapes outcome. It is also important to recognize that calm does not make one indifferent. On the contrary, it makes one precise. Precision replaces panic. Timing replaces haste. Effectiveness replaces exhaustion. You may discover that as anxiety fades, your capacity for sustained effort increases. You tire less easily. You recover more quickly. You concentrate more fully. These are natural results of mental economy. Time itself begins to feel different. The anxious man feels pursued by time. The calm man feels accompanied by it. One wastes time through worry. The other uses time through direction. This is how years are saved. Not by extending life, but by eliminating waste. Anxiety wastes time by rehearsing futures that never arrive. Calm conserves time by focusing on present action. If you ever doubt the value of this work, observe the lives of those governed by anxiety. Note their exhaustion, their indecision, their repeated mistakes. Then observe the lives of those who have mastered inner order. The difference is unmistakable. The latter are not free from responsibility. They are free from strain. They carry much, but they do not carry it inwardly. They act, then rest. They decide, then release. They trust the process they have learned to govern. This is the condition you are establishing now. It is not achieved through a single act, but through faithful practice. Each time you choose calm over resistance, clarity over rehearsal, trust over tension, you strengthen the habit that replaces anxiety permanently. Do not hurry this process. Habit is built quietly. Progress here is not dramatic, but it is certain. What you practice consistently becomes who you are. In time, you will find that anxiety no longer commands attention because it no longer serves a purpose. The mind has learned a better way. The body follows. Life responds. This is not a promise of ease, but a promise of order. And order is the foundation upon which all lasting success rests. Carry this understanding with you, not as something you must remember, but as something you live. Let it govern your mornings and your decisions. Let it steady you in uncertainty and guide you in action. When this is done, anxiety fades naturally, not because it was fought, but because it was replaced. And what replaces it is not emptiness, but authority. Authority over thought, authority over direction, authority over self. This is the quiet victory that endures. There is a point in every man's development when instruction must cease and identity must take its place. What you have heard, reflected upon, and practiced up to now is no longer meant to remain outside you as teaching. It must become the manner in which you meet life. Anxiety does not end because it has been argued against, but because the man who once carried it no longer exists in the same form. Most men attempt to cure anxiety while remaining inwardly unchanged. They seek relief without transformation. They wish to feel different while thinking, deciding, and reacting in the same manner as before. This effort fails inevitably, for anxiety is not an intruder. It is an expression of inner government. When government changes, expression follows. You must understand that the true work has never been about anxiety itself. Anxiety was merely the symptom that revealed disorder. The real work has been the establishment of inner authority. Once authority is restored, anxiety becomes unnecessary and fades naturally, like scaffolding removed after a structure is complete. This authority is not harsh. It is quiet, consistent, and firm. It does not shout commands. It sets order and allows life to respond. A man who has established such authority does not wake each day wondering how he will feel. He knows how he will think. Feeling follows thought, not the reverse. In earlier years, anxiety may have seemed like a companion, unwanted, yet familiar. It filled silence. It created motion. It gave the illusion of vigilance. As it recedes, you may notice moments of unfamiliar quiet. Do not mistake this quiet for emptiness. It is space reclaimed. It is room in which judgment may operate without interference. Many men fear this quiet at first. They are accustomed to inner noise, yet noise never produced wisdom. Silence reveals it. In silence, perception sharpens. In quiet, direction becomes apparent, without force. As anxiety dissolves, you will notice that you no longer measure yourself constantly. Comparison fades. The need for reassurance weakens. You are less concerned with how events appear and more concerned with whether your conduct is aligned with your principles. This shift marks maturity of mind. Others will observe this change without being able to name it. They may say, "You seem settled," or that you carry yourself differently. They may trust you instinctively. Trust is always extended to those who appear governed from within, rather than driven from without. This is why men who master themselves often rise naturally into positions of influence. Influence does not come from effort to persuade, but from consistency of being. People rely on those who are not easily disturbed. It is important to understand that this state does not eliminate difficulty. It eliminates confusion. Difficulty still appears, but it no longer scatters thought. It no longer produces panic. It becomes simply another condition to be met intelligently. The man who once suffered anxiety often fears that without it he will become careless or dull. The opposite occurs. His mind becomes sharper because it is no longer fatigued by unnecessary rehearsal. His attention becomes precise because it is no longer divided. Time itself begins to feel different. Anxiety distorted time, making minutes feel heavy and days feel rushed. Calm restores proportion. The man lives where he stands. He is no longer dragged mentally into futures that have not yet earned his attention. This restoration of time is one of the greatest gifts of inner order. A man who is no longer anxious recovers hours each day that were once consumed by inner conflict. These hours are returned as clarity, energy, and focus. You may find that you accomplish more with less effort. This is not idleness, it is economy. The anxious man wastes effort correcting imagined problems. The disciplined man applies effort only where it is required. Habit now becomes your greatest ally. What once required conscious correction now happens naturally. You notice strain sooner. You release it faster. You return to calm without struggle. This is not vigilance. It is familiarity with order. At this stage, repetition has done its work. The affirmations you once used deliberately are no longer needed constantly. The ideas behind them have taken root. Thought aligns itself without prompting. Yet you must not become careless with this discipline, not because anxiety will return suddenly, but because habits require respect. Order is maintained through continued practice, even when effort is no longer required. When new pressures arise, you will recognize them early. You will feel the first sign of inner resistance and adjust immediately. This early correction prevents accumulation. Others may still live in agitation and urgency. Do not judge them. Each man learns in his own season. Your task is not to correct others, but to remain aligned yourself. Alignment is persuasive without words. You may also notice a new quality in your decisions. They feel cleaner. You hesitate less, yet act more deliberately. This is because anxiety no longer clouds judgment. You choose based on principle rather than emotion. Mistakes may still occur, but they no longer wound your confidence. You correct them calmly and move on. The anxious man fears mistakes because they threaten his sense of control. The disciplined man treats mistakes as information. This freedom from self-condemnation is one of the quiet rewards of inner authority. You no longer punish yourself for being human. You focus instead on being exact. At times, you may reflect on the years spent under anxiety and feel regret. Dismiss it gently. Those years were not wasted. They were instructive. They revealed what did not work and prepared you to value what does. Many men never reach this understanding. They carry anxiety into old age, mistaking it for caution, responsibility, or care. You have been spared this fate by learning to distinguish true responsibility from false burden. Remember always that you were never meant to manage life through tension. Life responds to thought, order, and cooperation. When these are present, tension becomes irrelevant. As you move forward, let calm be your default posture, not because circumstances are always kind, but because calm is the state in which intelligence functions best. Return to it whenever you stray. If ever anxiety attempts to reclaim attention, do not engage it. Do not analyze it. Simply restore order. Place attention back where it belongs. Anxiety cannot survive where it is not fed. This is not a struggle. It is a choice repeated until it becomes identity. In time, you will realize that anxiety no longer feels personal. It appears as something external, fleeting. Without authority, you acknowledge it, and let it pass. It does not define you. What defines you now is steadiness, not rigidity, but balance, not indifference, but clarity. This steadiness will carry you through changes without upheaval. It will allow you to adapt without losing center. It will permit growth without exhaustion. And so, the work completes itself, not with triumph or declaration, but with quiet settlement. You began by believing anxiety was something to be fought. You end by knowing it was something to be outgrown. What remains is a mind governed by principle, a life directed by clarity, and a man no longer burdened by what he was never meant to carry. This is not an ending, but a beginning, the beginning of life,